There you go.
I think it's recording. Hold on. Yeah, it's recording.
Okay. I'm Anna.
I'm Jarrett.
So this is just our final presentation.
So the basic idea behind our presentation is that there's a conclusion being made that the student activists and survivors of the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, for example, the two people we focus on were David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez, were actually paid crisis actors. Many conspiracy theorists believe, or in the general public believe, that the individuals may have been trained to portray the role of victims who survived the shooting. And David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez are just the two examples of people that we did research on for this idea.
So the Stoneman Douglas school shooting, what happened was on February 14th of 2018, 17 people were killed and then 17 were also injured after Nicholas Cruz opened fire at the high school in Parkland, Florida. And then just what they had done after the shooting occurred for like the community.
So why has this kind of topic been so popular, I guess you could say, is because these school shootings have just seemed to happen more and more. And it's just been a more popular crime for many weird people that get their hands on guns. Gun violence is constantly being talked about and is a big issue in terms of politics. And since it's such a controversial topic, other explanations, such as the arguments on the next few slides, are created to like continue discussions about it. Just because there's so many people who like to try to bring up just alternate ideas or theories about different events that happen, such as school shootings.
So,
Does that me or you?
For the best arguments for our conclusion, the first one was that David Hogg memorizes specific stories or incidents that occurred during the interview, knows exactly what he's going to say, so he doesn't stumble his words. Another argument would be that he is also claiming to be a victim of the shooting only to support his father and the FBI.
And then the final argument is that some people have believed to have seen Emma Gonzalez on multiple cooking shows that were based out of New York City.
So the evidence for argument number one would be that David stumbles his words and then has a frustrated look across his face in the video that's released to the public. Because of this, it seems that he was incredibly upset that he messed up in front of the millions watching him. And then shortly after, he is able to repeat his original statement perfectly without any errors or hesitation. And then the audience can see that Hogg is not speaking from his heart because of this, but rather from what he had previously memorized. And then this can be used as a form of evidence that crisis actors may have been used due to a specific story having to be created. So because they weren't actually there they weren't there to exactly experience the incident, they have to kind of make up a story of things that happened to prove that they were there to the public. So that's exactly what David Hogg did in this example. And then the second argument would be that David Hogg's father does admit that he is a retired agent of the FBI. And then Hogg disagrees with President Trump's statement on Twitter regarding how the FBI missed signals sent out about the shooter. And then David and others also continue to support the FBI. So therefore, by claiming he was involved in the shooting, he can support his father by working with the FBI to change the bad reputation they have gained. But because David Hogg has such a good relationship with his father and he just wants to support his family, it makes sense that he would go against President Trump's statement, even if he did disagree with it, more so that his family's involved in this incident. And then you would think that if the FBI could have done something to stop the shooter in a sense, that David and others would kind of be mad at them, having that the incident couldn't have occurred if it was stopped sooner.
So the final argument that was made is that there have been a few different videos of Emma Gonzalez appearing on a cooking show, which was brought public soon after the shooting was done. And she had been described as being like a regular on the cooking show throughout the commentary during the show, which just happens to be based out of New York City. And she has been described as having like different hairstyles each time. And during all the post-shooting interviews and everything, and all the pictures after the shooting, she's shown having like a buzz cut style hair. So the woman that is seen in the video is actually this lady that's on the bottom, and you can tell that they do look kind of similar, with different haircuts, except the lady on the bottom just looks a little bit older. So it's not completely clear, but it's obviously um, a small piece of evidence that could support this argument. And then, so the reasoning behind the evidence, and then looking at the evidence, if we're looking at cognitive biases, so confirmation bias is the tendency to look at or favor evidence that confirms one's ideas while avoiding those that do not. Those who have formed the original conclusions and arguments refuse to acknowledge any of the information that disproves their beliefs, especially with all of these arguments. Many conspiracy theorists don't look into alternate information or different facts or evidence that disprove any of their beliefs. And then looking at conjunction fallacy, which is the tendency to assume specific conditions are more probable than general ones. Although some of the arguments against the conclusion seem more realistic, those who agree that the crisis actors were used for the reasons explained in the previous slides don't admit that the general ideas seem more likely to have happened, especially with like how many witnesses there were and how none of the students afterwards, since these two were huge in the topics talking about the shooting and how they were big advocates about about how bad school shootings are, and how they traveled around the country talking about them quite a bit. Like none of the students tried to say like, oh, they don't go here or anything like that, or that they didn't know them. So there wasn't really any evidence from the school, especially showing that they were part of it. I think you have this one.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
So for in-group bias, this is the tendency to favor the opinions of one's own group and their members. So as more people joined in on the support of these arguments, a specific group was formed and certain beliefs were established. So each member defended the beliefs of the group in facing any form of confrontation or discussion on the topic. So for those who obviously disagreed with this idea, there would be people that defended the beliefs and would always vouch for them and explain reasoning behind why, and just try and to convince those who disagreed with it to sort of support it. So they were very just supportive of each other and formed their own group in a way. So an alternative hypothesis for the conclusion would be that the Stoneman-Douglas shooting did occur and crisis actors were not used. It is difficult to understand why it would be beneficial to lie about a traumatic incident like this. So if you look at the pictures on the right, you can just see what the people and those who experienced this massacre had to go through. So putting people through that and the community through that is kind of difficult to understand, as previously stated, but you can just get an idea of what people actually were suffering from. So to put them through that would be difficult. So for an alternative hypothesis for argument one, like said on the previous slide, experiencing a traumatic event is very difficult to undergo, so it causes many to choke up when discussing their experience. And then speaking in front of a camera can be terrifying, as you want to sound mature and make valid statements. And then knowing that America has labeled you as a crisis actor adds additional pressure when being interviewed, and this could contribute to the mistakes being more commonly made. So just having, or David Hogg knowing that he was being looked upon as a crisis actor by America, and then just speaking in front of the public is nerve-wracking enough. So if you look on the right, that's kind of the situation he was put in every time. So if you had to continuously do that, it just kind of gets old after a while, but you can choke up on your words after discussing something so many times. And then the alternative hypothesis for argument two would be that although Hogg's father is a retired FBI agent, he honestly may have felt as if President Trump's statement was invalid. People are not perfect and are expected to make mistakes. So realistically looking at this, there was nothing that the FBI could have done differently to prevent the damage caused by the shooter. So, like said there, everyone's going to make mistakes at some point. You learn from your mistakes rather than focusing on them. And then Hogg would have honestly felt that it was not a true statement, and he just wanted to state his opinion to see if Trump would have seen the side of it coming from his viewpoint.
And then for the alternative hypothesis for the final argument, the woman in the cooking shows in New York City may have been a completely different person. And like you could see from that previous slide that we were talking about of showing the two close to each other, they did have some similarities, but I mean, at least in my opinion, the lady on the bottom looked significantly older than Emma from Stoneman Douglas. And the buzz cut style hair that Emma had in all the interviews may have just always been what her hair has been like. And Emma and the person from the cooking show could just look very similar, like I just said.
So for criteria of adequacy, testability, it's just stating that there must be some way to test a hypothesis so that it's confirmed or disconfirmed. In this situation, it is difficult to test that crisis actors were used in the Stoneman Douglas shooting. Each victim will most likely claim that they were students. And then you would just have to trust what those you're questioning are saying and take their word for granted. So even if there were crisis actors used, they're most likely not going to admit it. So it's kind of difficult to prove this hypothesis either true or false because you have to go off of what people are saying. And then for simplicity, all things should be equal, as the hypothesis that requires the fewest assumptions is most likely to be true. So this hypothesis is not simple, as it raises numerous questions relating to the massacre and causes multiple factors to be considered. An example of this would just be all the factors that we looked at throughout the slide and what we came up with for the presentation, but you just have to see all the alternative possibilities for it.
And then the final one, conservatism. So if a hypothesis would violate some well-established rule, it is not likely to be correct. So many believe that traumatic incidents such as school shootings are generally not planned or fake. Therefore, the conclusion for our presentation is difficult to support, as it is stating the opposite of this. So just looking at like all the alternative hypotheses and everything, and just like based off of how we've kind of been elaborating on everything, like I think one of the big things is that if there would have been more evidence discussing how maybe some of the students from Stoneman Douglas would have been coming out and saying, well, like, yeah, we don't know them, or something like along the lines of that, then these arguments would have been much stronger. But since there wasn't any of that, then it just doesn't make any sense. And then in conclusion, many of the conspiracy theorists had believed that these survivors of the shooting were actually paid crisis actors. These people have generally believed that these paid actors were hired to portray the roles of victims who survived the shooting. And after the shooting had happened, there were various newspapers and articles that were mainly written by conspiracy theorists that tried to provide evidence that Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg had either past experiences in acting or ties to the FBI. And although some of these newspaper articles and theories came out, there's not really been any significant evidence to try to support these arguments or try to falsify that the event had actually happened. Awkward pause.